Amazing Spider-Man 2 is an incredibly awkward movie to analyze because it's a deeply compromised piece of culture. On one hand, it's not the exact story that the storytellers wanted to tell.
It was story and character were actually not top of the priority list ultimately.
Got it.
And it breaks my heart.
Yeah,
I got
understand
heartbroken.
And on the other hand, it's not the product the studio needed to launch their planned transmedia empire. Therefore, this essay will have to take a far more explicit inductive approach, where observing and interpreting patterns will have to come before making any arguments or hypothesis. So basically, this video will be the same as the others, except I'm having to openly explain this because it has such a bad reputation that I'll look like a jackass if I don't.
Corporate America, really.
Alright, before this essay begins, it's important to untangle and organize the messy construction of this movie because it has a whopping 6 storylines, which all feature Spider-Man in some capacity. You have Spider-Man as a lonely son, the parents' mystery storyline.
I always thought that I'd have more time.
Spider-Man as a fearful boyfriend, the Gwen storyline.
It's my father, isn't it?
Spider-Man as a failed friend, the Harry Osborn storyline.
I do not have time!
Spider-Man as a failed idol, the Electro storyline.
So selfish.
Spider-Man as a neglectful nephew, the Aunt May working at the hospital storyline.
Alright, laundry sheriff.
And Spider-Man as a successful cultural icon, the New York storyline. As a result, what this movie is trying to explore is extremely inconsistent and obscured. It's not as laser-focused on the romantic component as the first movie, because Peter's relationship with other characters, in particular his parents, overshadows it. And it doesn't fully commit to deconstructing what Spider-Man means to the city in the same way that The Dark Knight did for Batman, because Electro's disenchantment with Spider-Man and the story of New York is completely forgotten in the second act.
Eyewitnesses who are going to tell us what they just saw. So tell us, how do you think Spider-Man did it? How do you think...
Subsequently, the reason behind the messy construction of the movie is that the story was designed to fit multiple narrative and business purposes. Like Spider-Man 1, this was a cinematic pitch designed to show a wide audience the relevance of the character in modern cinema. However, rather than showing how it can work as a 2-hour-long popcorn movie, this was a pitch to show how Spider-Man could work as a transmedia franchise, like Marvel Studios. The Sony email leaks revealed that there were plans for spin-offs with Aunt May, Gwen Stacy as Carnage, the Sinister Six, Black Cat and Silver Sable, Venom, and even more.
Part of the discussion was that possibly in 3, there was this idea Spider-Man would be able to take this formula and regenerate the people in his life that had died. So there was this discussion about that Captain Stacy would come back even bigger in episode 3, and I was like...
Therefore, the expansive, wide scope and the many different storylines had the purpose of trying to create a large world with an ecosystem of characters, stories, and conflicts linking back and away from Oscorp.
Corporate America, really.
As a result, within the axis of intertextuality, Amazing Spider-Man 2 fits in the left side of the missing line, because similar to the MCU, it's a piece of transmedia designed to accommodate and be consistent with other media forms and franchises. However, it's not doing it by contributing with surrounding stories. It builds its transmedia identity by harvesting the broad cultural memories of Spider-Man's history and lore. Like with the Sam Raimi trilogy, it relies on inference and nostalgia to communicate to its audience. And don't worry, I'm not going to reread Wilson Coe's essay for the, 5th time, was it? 3, 4th? Well, I'm pretty sure the whole axis makes even less sense now.
Hello, you're fired.
Therefore, every single narrative beat, character, and storyline are designed to provide room for expansion.
I've identified several worthy candidates, now that Spider-Man's gone.
As opposed to simply feeding back and deepening the main theme or message of this one single story. However, unlike Marvel Studios, its transmedia characteristics lacks a sense of confident purpose, because Marvel didn't really totally lean into its transmedia storytelling until after it introduced the individual media pieces.
The Mind Stone is the 4th of the Infinity Stones to show up in the last few years. It's not a coincidence.
Consequently, teasers like Amazing Spider-Man 2's credits, which introduces the various Sinister Six members, are not in dialogue with anything specific. It won't excite anyone in the same way as a MCU post-credit tease. Instead, it will probably confuse more people than anything.
How many men did you have in mind?
I want to keep it small.
As a result, Amazing Spider-Man 2 suffers deeply from a lack of clear narrative context. However, the contents may be muddled, but understanding how the story tries to frame itself may be the key to unlocking what it was trying to say under all the corporate demands. Oddly enough, the best place to start is the ending, because endings are important anchors for any story's preferred reading. For example, at the end of the first Amazing Spider-Man, he breaks his oath to be with Gwen, and then he swings off romantically into the night. Peter Parker could have been seen as a horrible, irresponsible douchebag for breaking the wish of a dead man. However, the ending also links back to the movie's opening, where Peter Parker's parents left him. Therefore, his return frames it as being a breakthrough of his emotional development.
I'm just no good for her.
Peter Parker, if there's one thing you are, it's good.
It could also be interpreted as him following his parents' footsteps because they also broke their promise, but regardless, this final note openly tells the audience that this was a story about a boy becoming a man by carving his own path in life. Subsequently, in Amazing Spider-Man 2, it frames itself in an explicitly cyclical way. The story is bookended with Gwen Stacy's graduation speech. However, the situations are inverted. At the beginning, Peter is missing the speech because he's busy helping the city, and at the end, he's listening while the city is in need of his help.
Because even if we fall short, what better way is there to live? And even if we fail, what better way is there to live?
As a result, the key idea that this speech tries its very best to try and thread through the story is the theme of inevitability. Gwen is preparing the class to accept future failures, and is also giving Peter Parker the guidance to live with his own, to persevere with her memory, even though their time is up. This message also links back to the first Amazing Spider-Man by giving the morally ambiguous ending an incredibly dark answer. Peter Parker did not free himself from the established path of his parents, because even if he doesn't let the guilt from the past or the fear of the future control him, he has no control over what time awaits him. Furthermore, the theme of time is also a pattern that threads through the 6 storylines, because everyone in some way are running out of time. Peter's parents ran out of time before the story even begins.
Our life as we know it is over. We're going to spend every day from now on looking over our shoulders.
Therefore, Peter Parker is technically trying to fight time by finding more about them. Peter Parker breaks up with Gwen because he's afraid of the inevitable future where she dies.
What if something happens to you just like it happened to him because of me?
Harry Osborn is literally dying like his father and psychologically erodes more and more as he grows desperate. Electro's story properly begins with his birthday.
You remember my birthday?
And he explodes when Spider-Man forgot his name because he spent his whole life being ignored. Aunt May gets a job at the hospital because she feels like time is taking away her usefulness and relevance.
Me, your stupid, non-scientific aunt, who doesn't know how to make ends meet, who has to take nursing classes with 22-year-old kids so I can pay for you to go to college, and I don't know how to do this without Ben.
And Spider-Man's success as a cultural icon in New York City is represented by the life of a little boy. Time is a villain in this movie. All the successes from characters come from them refusing to stop fighting even when time is up. Both Richard Parker and Gwen guide Spider-Man in death. And it's because a young boy refused to give up hope that Rhino was distracted long enough for Spider-Man to come in and save the day, whereas the villains are all people who failed to hold on just for a little bit longer. In comparison to Spider-Man 2 and Far From Home, all 3 sequels share the same message of perseverance. However, they're contextualized by very different messages and interpretations of the character. Both Spider-Man 2 and Far From Home share more or less the same story. Both Peter Parkers are tempted to quit their journeys because of the influence of a substitute mentor who becomes the antagonist.
Love should never be a secret.
Part of me that wants me to tell you, just turn around, run away from all this.
And then they reaffirm their values, which inadvertently causes the person they love to come back for them. However, Amazing Spider-Man 2 inverts all of these narrative ingredients. Peter Parker is completely confident as Spider-Man, so he has no interest to leave it. And there's no substitute mentor. Instead, he acts as the mentor for others, and it's his failure in mentoring Max that causes him to become a villain. The romance doesn't solve his pain, instead, it's the thing that almost causes him to quit.
Here it seems like everybody really needs him.
Therefore, in contrast, time is a friend to both Raimi and Watts Spider-Man, a force that seems cruel but is actually deeply benign. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man wanted to grow up, but his burden just wouldn't let him. Instead, he's limited to being a little boy forever. For example, the Spider-Man No More scene is abstractly portrayed as Peter Parker reliving the final conversation he had with Uncle Ben. Despite being well into his 20s, he has to put himself back into the shoes of a 17-year-old boy again to try and rationalize why he's still doing this.
Take my hand, son.
However, this Peter Pan logic isn't all bad, because this childish bubble means he can still be with the girl he wanted.
I've always been standing in your doorway.
And people will naturally come to shelter him, forgive him quickly, and defend him.
He's just a kid.
Therefore, for Spider-Man to exist in this version, time has forced Peter Parker to stay as a boy even when he's a man. Even by Spider-Man 3.
I'm not ready.
MCU Spider-Man is the opposite. He keeps losing the bearings of who he is because he can't stop changing. His journey started with him wanting to be someone else, and then he simply just wanted to be with someone.
Your friends are in trouble. You're all alone. Your tech is missing. What are you going to do about it?
His awakening comes from him letting go of the dream of being like Tony Stark and accepting his adult life on his own terms. Therefore, his self-identity keeps evolving and finding other quadrants to develop and conquer.
I really like you.
For Spider-Man to exist in the MCU, time has to keep pushing Peter Parker forward from being a boy to being a man in different ways. However, in Amazing Spider-Man 2, time is an existential struggle because it's an external force as opposed to an internal emotional tension. Unlike Tobey Maguire's version, Andrew Garfield isn't a victim of his own lack of self-awareness and is dooming his own life with the same mistakes over and over and over again.
Picking up where we left off.
Where was that? We never got on. You can't get off if you don't get on, Peter.
Or is constantly in a state of emotional flux like Tom Holland's Spider-Man, where one moment he loves Liz Allen and then loves MJ and then he wants to be this and he wants to be that. Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man just simply wants to be with Gwen and to find out what happened to his parents. That's it. But time keeps taking everything away piece by piece, to the extent that Gwen literally dies because the clock didn't stop ticking. The opening shot is literally the insides of a watch, and in the original ending, Richard Parker comes back and literally says,
We both speak for the dead.
Therefore, in contrast, for this Spider-Man to exist, he has to maintain a balance between being both a boy, because he's a son, and also as a man, because he's also a guardian. And this balance comes from him fighting time to keep protecting who he is, even when uncontrollable circumstances keep taking away his identity, be it his parents, his uncle, Captain Stacy, or even Gwen.
I'm your boy. You're my everything. You're enough. You're more than enough. That's not what this is about. Don't get that twisted. I love you so much.
What makes life valuable is that it doesn't last forever. What makes it precious is that it ends.
We've all got to make a choice. Right? Why choose you?
For real this time, if I had to pick my favourite live-action depiction of Spider-Man, including all the Andrew Garfield's movies now, I think I would have to pick the Nicholas Hammond.
The value system, I suppose, of corporate America, really.
Tessa.